I didn't yell. I didn't fall apart. I just stood there in the doorway of my son's bedroom, holding his little jacket in my hands, staring at what he was showing me. He'd pulled up his shirt without saying a word, just lifted it the way kids do when they want you to look at something. Matter of fact, no drama, like he was showing me a cool bug he found in the yard. I saw the bruises first, a long one across his lower ribs, already turning that sick greenish yellow at the edges. Then a smaller one, higher up near his shoulder blade, round, like a knuckle. "Grandpa did that," my son said. "He said I needed to toughen up. My son is 8 years old. I need you to understand something before I keep going. My father-in-law is not some rough around the edges stranger. He is the kind of man who sits in the front pew every Sunday, the kind who brings casseroles to sick neighbors and shakes hands with the pastor after service and gets his name on the donor wall at the local YMCA. Everyone in their town, a small place about 40 minutes outside of Columbus, thinks he walks on water. And I had sent my son to spend the long 4th of July weekend with him. That was the part I kept coming back to, standing in that doorway. I had packed his bag. I had driven him there myself. I had kissed him goodbye on the front porch while my father-in-law stood there in his American flag polo shirt, smiling, waving like a man with nothing to hide. My son's name is Wyatt. He's small for his age. The pediatrician says he's in the 23rd percentile for height, which is nothing. Just genetics. My husband's side of the family runs lean, and he has this gap between his front teeth that he's weirdly proud of because his best friend at school has the same one. He is funny and loud and he talks constantly, and I love him more than I have words for. He came home on Monday evening. I'd made his favorite dinner, pasta with the butter sauce, the simple kind, the way he always asks for it. I heard the car in the driveway. I heard the front door. And then he just walked into the kitchen, dropped his backpack on the floor, and before I could even say welcome home, he pulled up his shirt. "Grandpa said not to tell you," Wyatt said. "But it really hurts, Mom." I had to hold the counter. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I asked him, very slowly, very carefully, the way they tell you to do in those parenting books, keeping your voice calm so you don't make them feel like they did something wrong. I asked him to tell me what happened. He told me. He told me that on Saturday afternoon, while my husband was at a work call in the back bedroom and I was at home, my father-in-law had taken Wyatt out to the garage. Wyatt had knocked over a box of tools by accident, a box that was on a low shelf that an 8-year-old absolutely could have reached without any real effort, and my father-in-law had told him he was clumsy. Then he'd said worse things. He'd said Wyatt was soft, that he cried too easily, that his dad hadn't been like that at his age, and it was embarrassing. And then he'd grabbed Wyatt by the arm and hit him twice, with his open hand hard enough to bruise. When Wyatt started crying, my father-in-law had told him to stop. He'd said, "Men don't do that." He'd made Wyatt help clean up the tools without acknowledging what had just happened. And that night at dinner, he'd acted completely normal, passed the rolls, watched the baseball game, laughed at his own jokes. My husband wasn't home when Wyatt got back. He was still at a work event. He travels for work, regional sales. He's gone a few days most weeks, and I had maybe 2 hours before he'd walk through the door. I want to be honest about what I was feeling in that moment because I think it matters. I was not just angry, I was something past angry. There was this cold, settling quiet inside me, the kind that feels like the moment before something breaks. I had trusted that man with my child. My husband had grown up with that man. We had spent every Thanksgiving at that house, every Easter, every 4th of July for the past 6 years. I had sat at that dinner table and smiled and helped clear the dishes and let my son run around that backyard and never, not once, had I seen anything that made me think he was capable of this. Or had I? Because here is the thing I kept circling back to, standing in Wyatt's room while he ate crackers and watched cartoons like nothing had happened. Kids are so resilient it breaks your heart. There had been moments. Small ones. A comment here, a look there. The time my father-in-law told Wyatt he threw a ball like a girl and laughed when I said something about it. The time he'd told my son to shake it off when Wyatt scraped his knee badly enough to need a bandage. The time he'd said, at Christmas 2 years ago, that kids these days didn't know what hard work was and had looked directly at Wyatt when he said it. I had let every single one of those slide. I had told myself it was a generational thing. I had told myself he didn't mean it. I had been so committed to keeping the peace in this family that I had missed what was building underneath it. I was not going to let that be the story I told myself anymore. I called my neighbor first. She has a daughter in Wyatt's class, she's over here half the time anyway, and I asked her if Wyatt could come hang out for a little while. She said of course. I walked Wyatt over, told him I'd pick him up in a bit, made sure he had his little backpack with his tablet. I did not leave my 8-year-old home alone. I want to be clear about that because I know how this kind of story goes. People always want to find something to criticize about the mother, and I am not giving anyone that. I got back in my car. I sat in my driveway for exactly 60 seconds, and then I drove to my father-in-law's house. It takes me 38 minutes to get there on a normal day. I don't remember most of the drive. I remember the highway. I remember a gas station I passed where someone was washing the windows of their car, and I thought in this weird detached way that it was a nice evening for that. I pulled into his driveway just after 7. The lights were on. His truck was there. I could see the television flickering through the front window. I knocked on the door. I heard him get up. The footsteps were slow, unhurried. He opened the door with that same easy smile, the one I'd seen 1,000 times, and for 1 second I actually felt the pull of it. The social gravity of being polite, of being the good daughter-in-law, of making this easy. That second passed. I need to talk to you about what you did to Wyatt, I said. The smile didn't disappear right away. It sort of shifted, rearranged itself into something more careful. What are you talking about? He said. Wyatt had a great time this weekend. He showed me his bruises, I said. He told me everything. There was a pause. He stepped back slightly, like he was going to invite me in, but I didn't move. I stayed on the porch. Kids exaggerate, he said. Ace? He used your name. He told me which day it happened, what time, what he knocked over. He told me what you said to him. Word for word. Something changed in his face then. The performance of it, the neighborly man of God face, slipped just enough for me to see something colder underneath it. He straightened up. I disciplined him, he said. That's what his father needed sometimes too, and he turned out fine. You're raising that boy to be weak. Someone has to. You hit my son, I said, twice, hard enough to bruise him. He's 8 years old and you told him not to tell me. I've been raising kids since before you were born. You will never be alone with my son again, I said. Ever. I want to be clear about that right now so there's no confusion later. That's done. He laughed. He actually laughed. It was short and dismissive and it sounded like something he'd used his whole life to shut people down. You can't just decide that, he said. That's not how family works. Watch me, I said. I turned around and walked back to my car. He called after me, said something about how I was overreacting, how I was always too sensitive, how his son would have something to say about this. I got in the car, put it in reverse and drove out of his driveway. My hands were steady the whole time. I don't know how. My husband called me when I was 10 minutes from home. His father had already gotten to him first. I let it ring. I picked up Wyatt, held him for a long time in my neighbor's foyer while she pretended to be busy in the kitchen so we'd have a moment, and then I drove us home. I ran a bath for Wyatt. I took photos, careful ones, good lighting, the kind you'd use in a document, of every mark on his body. I wrote down everything he'd told me in his exact words with the timestamp of when he told me. I had been a paralegal for 3 years before I took time off when Wyatt was born, and I knew, even just from the edges of that experience, that documentation matters, that it matters a lot. When my husband walked in at 9:15, Wyatt was already asleep. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my phone and a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He stood in the doorway. I could see from his face that he'd had a full conversation with his father already. His jaw was set. His voice, when he finally spoke, was tight. He said you showed up at his house and accused him of abusing Wyatt, he said. I didn't accuse him, I said. I told him what Wyatt showed me and what Wyatt told me. Kids fall, they get bruises. Come here, I said. He didn't move. Please, I said. Come here. I pulled up the photos on my phone and I put it on the table in front of him. He looked down. I watched his face. I have been married to this man for 9 years and I know every version of his expressions, and what I saw move across his face in that moment was not disbelief. It was recognition. It was something he'd been carrying for a long time that finally had a name. He sat down slowly. Wyatt said not to tell me, I said. His grandfather told him that. Don't tell your mom. He said it right after. That's not disciplines. That's a secret. And 8-year-olds don't keep secrets from their mothers about accidents. My husband put his head in his hands. We sat there for a long time. Here is the part I want to be honest about, because I think it's the part people don't always talk about. I was not just angry at my father-in-law in that moment. I was angry at my husband too. Not because he did anything, he wasn't there, he didn't know, but because I kept thinking about all those small moments I'd let go. The ball-throwing comment, the shake it off. And I kept thinking, had my husband seen those too? Had he also been letting them slide? Had we both been doing this? Telling ourselves it was nothing, keeping the peace, protecting this man's image in our family, while Wyatt was quietly absorbing the message that his feelings didn't matter and his grandfather's approval was worth more than his comfort? I asked him that. Directly, that night. He was quiet for a long time and then he said yes. He said he'd seen things over the years that had bothered him. And he'd told himself it was how he'd been raised and he'd turned out okay and maybe that was enough. It wasn't enough. I said, not for Wyatt. He nodded. He didn't argue with that. The next morning, I called our pediatrician's office when they opened at 8. I explained what had happened and they got us in by 10. Our doctor documented the bruising formally. She was calm and professional and incredibly kind to Wyatt, who at this point had decided the whole thing was sort of interesting and kept asking if he could see the photos she was taking. She gave us a referral to a child therapist who specializes in trauma and family dynamics. She told us the steps we should take if we wanted to pursue this formally, which we did. We filed a police report that afternoon. My husband came with me. He sat next to me the entire time and he did not flinch and he did not make excuses for his father. I will give him that. I will always give him that. My father-in-law called 4 times that day. My husband answered once briefly and told him that we had gone to the pediatrician and filed a report, and that we would be talking to an attorney about next steps, and that he should not contact us again until we reached out to him. He hung up before his father could respond. There is something I want to say about my husband's family, because I don't think he is a villain in this story. I think he is someone who grew up inside something, and when you grow up inside something, you don't always see its edges. The house his father built had rules. You don't cry, you don't complain, you don't make things difficult, you respect your elders even when your elders are wrong. And my husband had lived by those rules so long that some of them had become invisible to him. Part of what we've had to work through together in the months since this happened is that he's had to look at his childhood and ask himself some hard questions about what was normal and what was harm, and whether those two things were ever the same. That has not been easy for him. I'm not pretending it has been. But Wyatt needed us to do it. The attorney we spoke to laid out our options clearly. Given Wyatt's age, the documentation and the medical records, we had a strong case for a restraining order. We pursued it. My father-in-law was served 3 weeks after the 4th of July. He did not take it well. He called my mother-in-law, his ex-wife. They'd divorced when my husband was in high school, and apparently had a long, tearful phone call in which he told her I was destroying the family. She called me afterward. I answered expecting a fight. Instead, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I'm sorry this happened to Wyatt. I'm sorry it took this long for someone to make him stop." She didn't elaborate. I didn't push, but I thought about that sentence for a long time afterward. My father-in-law has a reputation in that town. He has the polo shirt and the church pew and the donor wall at the YMCA. He has the smile he showed me when he opened the door that evening, the one that's been working on people for decades. What he doesn't have is any understanding of how much the world has changed. Or maybe he does understand and he simply doesn't care because he made the mistake of telling his story to everyone who would listen. His neighbors, people at his church, a couple of longtime friends, and some of those people reached out to me, not to defend him, to tell me they'd seen things too. A grandchild who'd come home subdued after a visit, a neighbor's kid who'd stopped wanting to go over there. Small things, things that people had filed away and told themselves weren't their business. I am not going to pretend that I handled all of this perfectly. I've thought 100 times about what I would do differently. I would trust my instincts sooner. I would not explain away the small moments. I would not prioritize keeping peace in rooms where my child was being hurt, even in the slow, quiet ways that don't leave marks. Wyatt has been seeing his therapist every other week since July. She is wonderful. He calls her the feelings doctor and he goes willingly, which I was told is a sign that kids feel safe with their therapist, and that matters a lot to me. He has not asked to see his grandfather. He has not mentioned him. Once, a couple months ago, he asked me if he was going to get in trouble for telling me, and I held his face in my hands and I told him, slowly, so he would remember it, that he would never, not once, be in trouble for telling me the truth about something that hurt him. That was my job. To know. He nodded like this was obvious information, the way kids do, and then he asked if we could have the pasta for dinner. We had the pasta. The restraining order stands. My husband and his father have had one conversation since July, mediated through the attorney, which did not go well. My husband has told me that he doesn't know what the relationship with his father looks like going forward. Possibly nothing. Possibly something very small and very carefully bounded. He is still figuring it out, and I have told him I will support whatever he decides as long as Wyatt is never in that man's unsupervised presence again. He agreed, without hesitation. That matters. My mother-in-law sent Wyatt a birthday card in September. She included a $20 bill and a note that said she hoped he was having a great third-grade year. Wyatt bought himself a Lego set with it. He asked if Grandma could come visit sometime, meaning her, not his grandfather. I told him we'd figure something out. We're figuring it out. That night, the night Wyatt came home and lifted his shirt and showed me what had been done to him, I made myself a promise that I would stop apologizing in my head for noticing things, that I would stop editing my own instincts to make other people comfortable, that the person I owed the most to in every room we walked into together was the 8-year-old standing next to me who still thought I could fix everything. I can't fix everything, but I can show up. I can take the photos. I can drive the 40 minutes and stand on the porch and say the thing that needs to be said to the person it needs to be said to. I can make sure Mice knows that when it matters most I came.